I wanted to start off to tell you a little bit about my story and how I got to be here today because it's weird. If someone had ever told me that I would go around the country speaking to conservatives, I probably would have told them they were crazy. And I tell people that because I had a plan. I was working at ACORN. I was going to go off and run some great nonprofit like Emily's List or Planned Parenthood or SEIU. I was going down that road, and I tell people if you want to make God laugh, make a plan. So I'm glad to be here today because I think I was on the wrong path, and I think that and I'm now where I'm supposed to be. But how did I get there? It started in 2001, right after September 11th. I had been calling the ABA, the American Bar Association, every single month, asking them if they had any internships available. Well, the 1 month when I didn't call them, they called me. And they offered me an internship in their Central and East Eurasian Law Initiative, CELI. And so I went to Washington, D.C., and I began working with CELI. And it was great because they were focusing on former Soviet Union countries, the Kazakhstan, Turkestan. A lot of these countries didn't have relevant laws such as prenuptial agreements or whatever. So it was my job to research the laws for the lawyers who were working directly overseas in these countries. Well, along the way, and it was great, I was working in Washington, D.C., right there, probably a few blocks from the White House, and I was having $300 lunches with some of the great liberal legal minds of the country, but I was going home from this unpaid internship to Southeast D.C. Now, how many of you guys are familiar with Southeast D.C.? Now, this is not the D.C. you see on the tour guides. This is not the Capitol, and it's all pretty and everything. It's where you go down about 3 miles down Pennsylvania Avenue, going towards Maryland. You go across the Anacostia Bridge, and it's a whole other world. Today, I call them liberal fallout zones, areas where it looks like the effects of Johnson's Great Society is that someone dropped a bomb and left. But at the time, I didn't know that. All I saw was stark urban poverty. I came from Birmingham, Alabama. I grew up within blocks of the 16th Street Baptist Church. And I have to tell you, we were poor, but we weren't poor like that. Poverty is different in the South. When I was growing up, even though we didn't have a lot of money, we still interacted and lived among white people. My grandmother's best friend was a 99-year-old white woman that lived next door, we were her only family. So every day she'd send the kids over there, and we'd have to make sure she was okay and do little stuff for her, and she'd kiss us on the cheeks and give us candy. It wasn't really this big difference of black and white, rich and poor. I knew we were poor, but it didn't seem that bad. In D.C., urban poverty was stark. I didn't realize how bad it was until I got there. They had these one-way in, one-way out ghettos called Paradise, which was not paradise. They were these straight up and down buildings where you had 3 generations of people living in poverty. You have the grandmother who's got kids, and then you've got the mom, she's got kids, and then her daughter's got kids, and they're all in that same housing project. And since I didn't have any money, and those were the people the friends that I knew, they let me stay with them. And they were nice people, but I got to see things that were horrible. Like, there was a bus that would come to pick up the kids every day and take them to get their HIV medication and bring them back to the schools. And it was very disheartening. How did people that look like me end up in situations like that? And why was I focusing on international relations when there was so much going on in my own backyard? Excuse me, guys. So let me just tell you a little bit how I got to ACORN. So I went back to Alabama, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to focus on what I can do to help the community. So I started looking around, and I found out about ACORN. How many of you guys have ever heard of ACORN before the bad stuff? Okay, yes. They seem like a really great organization. Their website talked about helping people, ending poverty, giving the people a voice, and reaching out into the communities. And you see pictures of people with their hands up in the air, and they were fighting, and they were excited. And so I decided I wanted to work with them. They offered me a job in Birmingham, Alabama, and I turned it down. And I said I wanted to go back to D.C. So I waited a couple of years, and then they offered me a job in the Strategic Writing and Research Department of ACORN Political Operations. Now, this was in D.C., right on Capitol Hill, right down the street from where all the big stuff, the major decisions were made, and I felt like I was about to be a part of that. So I left Alabama for the last time, and I went to D.C., and I began working with ACORN. But the first thing I realized when I got there is that I wasn't working with ACORN. I was working with Project Vote. Project Vote is ACORN's voter registration arm. They're the organization that Obama worked for in the 90s. They're the organization that has survived all of the scandal and the bankruptcies, and they are still there right now on Capitol Hill running a massive voter registration drive to this day and colluding with the Department of Justice in suing states for photo voter ID and violations of the National Voter Registration Act. So this organization is very powerful, very well funded with connections that go all the way to the White House. And this was the organization that was paying my paycheck. But ACORN was the organization that was giving me my duties. So it was kind of weird. You have, on one hand, this tax-exempt 501c3 that cannot engage in political activity, and then you have ACORN, this giant, partisan head that's all about electing Democrats and squashing Republicans and fighting capitalism. And they were the ones that were giving me my assignments. So one of my first assignments was to investigate the voter fraud allegations that came out of the 2004 elections. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you in this room remember how contentious it was in 2004. We were coming off of the 2000 elections. The Democrats felt like the election had been stolen from them, and they were so intent on getting Bush out of office that they had these websites against George Bush, and they were burning him in effigy, and George Soros was pumping millions of dollars into these far-left groups across the country. One of them was a group called America Coming Together, ACT. ACT was ran by Jonathan Soros, which is George Soros' son, and they were accused of aggressive, thug-like voter registration tactics, a massive voter registration fraud, and they were composed of ACORN, SEIU, Emily's List, Planned Parenthood. I could go down the list. Your usual suspects of far-left organizations had all put in a $50,000 buy-in to become part of this group. And they were all about legal women voters. They were all about voter registration across the country, but ACORN was the lead group, the head group. And because of that, almost everywhere from Pennsylvania to Florida to Ohio to California, there were accusations of voter registration fraud. We're talking Mickey Mouse, the starting lineup of the Dallas Cowboys, people that have been dead for over 20 years. Somehow all of these people made it onto the voting rolls during this voter registration drive. So it was my job to make ACORN look good, but I couldn't. Because no matter how much I investigated the allegations, what I found out is that no matter where these people were, from Pennsylvania to California, they were all trained the same way. ACORN was producing a culture and a climate where fraud could exist. And there was nothing you could do to deny that once you really looked into it. So I turned in my report, and what I got back from my supervisors, they would just totally chuck that out, and it was all this glowing how ACORN was ahead of the fraud, and we reported it before anyone else did, and these people were bad people because they were hiring ex-cons and ex-crackheads and people of low moral character. So if something did happen, it was pretty easy to throw them under the bus and just point to their prior bad acts. And that's exactly what they did, and the funders believed it. And the newspapers believed it because they had been working with ACORN for years, and those people were thrown under the bus. And I have to say, that was my first crisis of conscience at ACORN, because when you're a liberal, and I don't know if you guys understand how that works, but number one, you're a narcissist. You're a complete narcissist. You think that you are so right that you should pass laws and make everyone else think like you. If you're a vegan, everyone should be a vegan. If you wear hemp, everyone should wear hemp. And you're also... You participate in groupthink. It's no longer about this. It's about this. How you feel, what's right. The ends justify the means. We're doing this for the movement. You give up your individuality and you become part of a cog in a machine. And that's exactly where I was at ACORN. And I was very... I had come out of college with a chip on my shoulder like this big. I remember having an African-American studies professor. He was a white guy. And for some reason, he was always trying to get the black people in the class riled up. Like, we weren't militant enough for him and stuff. So along the way, I did become militant. There was an article Politico.com did in 2006 about this crazy woman on a bullhorn out in front of the Federal Reserve building who was yelling at cars as they were passing by. You got the ACORN people in the back chanting some, chant about, what's right is right, give us our money tonight or something. And you've got a baby asleep in a stroller wearing an ACORN t-shirt with a sign that says, "Don't foreclose on my home." I was that crazy woman on the bullhorn, and that was my baby in the stroller. because we needed a prop. They were like, oh, Anita, you've got a baby. Come on out. They're not going to arrest us if we put a kid out there, put an ACORN t-shirt on the kid and put her in front. And so that's what we did. We were trying to make people feel bad because there was a black baby that was going to lose her house. It was all about, using feelings and emotions and race in order to get what we wanted. And so we were yelling at the cars and they were honking at us. But the whole thing was, what most people don't realize is that it was all strategic. Because the office that I worked in had ACORN National, DC Local ACORN, ACORN Housing. This is the ACORN Housing that you might have seen on the ACORN videos that James O'Keefe did, where the DC office was right there where I worked. You had Project Vote. You had the American Institute for Social Justice. You had the ACORN Institute, and you had a host of other little smaller ACORN organizations out there. So you'd think this would be a huge office, but it wasn't, because it was all the same organizations. It was all the same people. I wore the Project Vote hat. I took that hat off, put the ACORN hat on, do what I had to do. It was maybe like 20 people in the whole office, but we ran, upwards of 15 nonprofits out of that. And one of them was ACORN Housing. What most people don't know is that we were the ones providing those bad loans that led to the housing crisis. We were using undocumented income now undocumented income really is not you thinking illegal workers going out there cutting grass or whatever. No, we're talking drug money and money coming under the table from illegal activity that we know was illegal. We're talking using food stamps as income. All kinds of stuff to get these loans that we knew, they called them adjustable rate mortgages. We knew that they were going to come due and these people wouldn't be able to pay. So there's an ACORN document that goes back probably like 2005, 2006. We saw the cracks in the housing market and we said we were going to be right there when it happened. So we switched over from giving out bad loans to protesting foreclosures. And we were getting money from Bank of America for refinancing the bad loans we had given out. It was all systematic. But when you're there and you see this stuff, you don't really realize what you're doing. It's just like being outside of Sherwin-Williams and you've got a bunch of people that are taking off and they're out there, they're protesting, they've got signs and get the lead paint out of our houses. And then what you don't realize on the back end is that Sherwin-Williams has already agreed to get the lead paint out of the black people's houses, but they didn't want to give ACORN any money. So ACORN turned them down. And we were out there protesting. We said we're going to put a bunch of black people in front of your building on the 5 o'clock news. And they did that for weeks until Sherwin-Williams gave in and gave ACORN settlement money. It was never about helping the people. It was never about ending poverty. The money, they weren't fighting to end poverty. The money was in the fight. As long as they said that they were out there trying to do well and trying to help people, they were getting millions of dollars every year. When you think about it, ACORN just wasn't one organization. There were 360 organizations, all under one umbrella. Each one of them with upwards of $10 to $20 million apiece as a budget every year. That's coming in from tax dollars. That's coming in from grants, those neighborhood revitalization grants. And you've got foundations like the Rockefellers and Herb and Marion Sandler and Patricia Ballman. And I could go down the list of these far left liberal funders, Barbara Streisand, the Springsteen, they were all funding these organizations that were saying they were fighting to end poverty every single year. But they got worse. If you looked at what happened in Southeast DC after 35 years of having ACORN in DC, it's worse than it ever was before. When did they ever put a stop sign or a stoplight or paint a building or anything in these neighborhoods? Never. And along the way, I tell people if you stay at ACORN longer than a year, you got to go watch. Because that's how it was. The more you stayed there, you were trusted more because the attrition rate was so horrible. Because you come in and you're young and you're idealistic and you think you're going to save the world. And along the way, you're tested every single time. And being there that long, I saw so much and I kept being tested. But I really believed we were part of that. And I was almost at what ACORN likes to call the true believer status. True believer status is when you're so far in and you're so far gone that you know what the organization's about, but you're still there anyway. That's your Zach Paulette's, that's your, Jessica Angus, Nathan Henderson James. I could go down the list of people that bring in us young folks and try to turn us into those true believers. And in 2006, I'll never forget, I was working on the political plans for Colorado, Ohio, and Maryland, and we were setting the stage for Obama. That's where we were at in 2006. We put minimum wage on the ballot in 7 states, New Mexico and Florida included, knowing that minimum wage would drive the turnout. And here in Florida, over 71% of the population came out and voted for minimum wage. And that means that they voted for that class of '06. The Pelosi's, the Harry Reid, everyone that came in '06 and set the stage for Obama. And we thought it was so funny because we were putting them there so they could do the rest of the job that we had been doing with the housing market. People talk about, oh, we blame well, Obama hadn't had a chance, and they blame Bush for everything. But they don't realize that Congress had the power of the purse, and they'd had it since '06. George Bush went to them and told them Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were out of control, and they ignored him because they were hoping that the housing market would collapse. They were hoping the economy would collapse. We were setting the stage for Obama. Once again, we've got ACORN documents that go back to '04, before he took the stage at the Democrat National Convention, before anyone had ever heard about this charismatic guy named Barack Obama. We knew he was going to get elected in '08, and we were putting these conditions in place for that to happen. So after the '06 elections, we went to Pelosi, and we were like, we got you guys in office, right? And this is what we want. And what we asked for was minimum wage across the country, and we got it. Ted Kennedy pushed through the new minimum wage standards, and we were able to use that as street cred to go out into the community and go, see, this is what ACORN got you. We got you more money. We raised the minimum wage. Do this for us. And so we were getting money. We were getting bodies. We were expanding the organization to where it was in almost every state ahead of the 2008 elections. And what that led to, and I'll never forget this because I was there the night Nancy Pelosi took the stage as the Speaker of the House. And I will tell you guys, I was crying. I really thought that we had done something big. And I look back now and they say hindsight is 20/20, but I feel like the biggest idiot in the world to think that I was crying that Nancy Pelosi was going to be the next Speaker of the House. But what that led to actually was more clout and credibility for ACORN than we had ever had before. It was almost in reach. What Zach Paulette, the executive director of ACORN, would call a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We were going to fundamentally change America, and we were going to do it with Barack Obama. So we went out and we were going to do planning. And every year when we do planning, they bring the national staff, the people that they trust, to a mountain retreat. It's called La Petite Jeanne. It's in Arkansas, but we're country, so we called it Petit Jean. And we go to Petit Jean every year and we plan our little our little strategies. And this year was most important because we were planning what was going to happen within the first 100 days of Obama getting elected. And I like to call that ACORN Socialist Wish List because that's exactly what it was. We went through it, and now Tea Party never even thought of you guys, never thought it would happen. So we're sitting there thinking cap and trade, universal health care, card check through the Employee Free Choice Act, a host of environmental justice issues that we had just begun to push across the country, mostly in Oregon and some of the states like Washington, where these things can actually happen. But we were looking at expanding this everywhere. So when you think environmental justice, think that with the water that got turned off in California because of one little minnow. That's the type of things that we wanted to do. And being a student of history, I was a student of political science and history with a concentration in Russian studies or Eastern European studies. I understood what socialism was. I understood what communism was. But that was never something that they would actually say. You would never get ACORN to say the word socialism to any of its people because black people are not radicals. You're not going to come into a black neighborhood and go, guys, we're going to fundamentally change the country. You want to overthrow the government. We're like, no, thank you, get out. We're worried about paying our light bills and taking care of our kids. You're not going to get people riled up like that. But if you talk about, what did Obama call it? Spreading the wealth around and what's fair and what's right and giving back where something's been taken from you, they would take the former racial histories of these communities, look at them and figure out how they could make the people mad or upset or feel like something had been taken away from them. And that's how they got them excited. It was never that these people wanted to be a socialist. They would make capitalism seem like something that was racist. So all of a sudden, ACORN became the good organization because they were fighting capitalism. And that's how they did it. They manipulated these people. I remember we had this rap. They call them raps when you go out and you knock on the door and people open and you have to tell them something. And they had these raps where they would go into the communities and they would say stuff like, aren't you tired of these rich white people coming in your communities and they don't ever give you anything? Aren't you mad? Aren't you angry? Don't you want to do something about it? And then they give you a sign and a Lunchable and put you on a bus and take you downtown. And next thing you know, you're on the 5 o'clock news protesting in front of someone's house. You don't even know why you're there. That's exactly how they manipulated people. And it happened all the time. So I started to get nervous because this was the point where I was a Hillary supporter at first. Honestly, I was looking for the third term of Bill Clinton. Most black people thought Bill Clinton was the first black president. We were cool with him. We didn't know anything about this Barack Obama. I remember when he wasn't black enough for black people. He was like, we was like his mom's white. He came from Hawaii. What are you talking about? So they went on this PR campaign, a massive PR campaign across the country. It's just like when Obama talks right now, he's got two speeches. There's what you guys hear, and there's what we hear as black people, because he uses certain code words that incite feelings and emotions within the community. The best example I can give to you is where if you talk state rights to a black person of a certain age, they don't hear state rights. They don't hear 10th Amendment issues. They hear Jim Crow. It's certain code words. So what yes we can meant to the black community was, yes we can elect a black president. Yes we can overcome the racism that keeps you down and all the other little feelings and emotions and get people excited and riled up. So that's what they did. They put him on Tavis Smiley and the Steve Harvey show, and next thing you know, he's around here playing basketball, the most awkward basketball player I've ever seen in my life. But he was out there doing all that stuff. And they made him black enough for black people. It was PR that did it. Before that, he didn't have a chance in the community because he didn't relate to us. So that was the biggest obstacle that ACORN was able to overcome, and that's why he needed them. At the time when we were making these plans, the Obama campaign was paying $880,000 to a group called Citizen Services Incorporated, which turned out to be a business group offshoot of ACORN for lighting and sound. And then once it was discovered that that was untrue, he was forced to amend his FEC filings to show that it was for Get Out the Vote. That's because they were out there in these communities, pushing hope and change, pushing yes we can. So in 2007, right after this meeting at Petty Jean, I got a call from the Obama campaign. I was sitting at my desk, and I was kind of excited because I had started to get on that hope and change bandwagon, just like everyone else. It was looking bad for Hillary in the caucuses, and I was like, okay, Obama's my guy. So I was so excited, I sent an email out to my supervisors. And what I got back was they called me into the office, and I was told not to send stuff like that out in email, no paper trails for things, related to Obama. And then they gave me the Obama second quarter donor list for 2007. Now, how many of you guys remember all of the contention that was around Obama and his donors? Because he turned off the credit card verification on his website, you remember that? Yeah, and he wouldn't turn over any of his smaller donors. FEC law rules require that you don't have to turn over any donors under $200. McCain turned over everything, but Obama refused to. But he gave it to ACORN. And I'm talking like we had the $200 donors, the $25 donors, the $5 donors. This list was so huge, there was no way you could print it out. It would take you days just to go through one letter of the alphabet. But it was my job to go through there, identify the celebrities, identify the high-profile people that had money, and identify the maxed-out presidential donors. And we were going to contact them and let them know that if they still wanted to give to ACORN, and we could guarantee that we were going to get Obama elected. Now, this was my last and final crisis of conscience at ACORN, because I honestly felt, and like I said, hope and change bandwagon, I honestly felt that Obama was a good guy and that ACORN had their fingers around his neck, and if we got rid of ACORN, Obama would be able to do his job. So I looked around trying to figure out how to expose this group. I had already tried calling the Employment Policies Institute. They run a site called RodneyAcorn.com. And I talked to a guy named Brett Jacobson that now writes for Breitbart Empire. And I was surprised because this was like my first real interaction with conservatives, really. Because I tell people all the time, I'm from the South, black Catholic from the South. With Jesus and JFK in our house. All my friends were Democrats. All my mom's friends were Democrats. We just didn't socialize with conservatives. So I didn't know what to expect. And I was so surprised because he told me, you just had a baby and it's kind of dangerous to expose ACORN. Why don't you wait until after you get away from the organization and I will help you? And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? A conservative that's not trying to mind me to destroy this organization that helps black people? So number one, it let me know in the back of my head somewhere that maybe it all wasn't as what I thought it was, because I thought that this evil person was eventually immediately going to jump on trying to take down ACORN. And number two, it also gave me a little bit of confidence, and I started trying to really help the organization from within. And if there was a watch list at ACORN, I think I got on it, because I suggested things like reaching out to the middle class and, changing our image. But they didn't want people like you in the organization, because, Michelle Malkin says, sunlight is the best disinfectant. So when people are paying attention to what you're doing, you can't do the shakedowns, and you can't do the little shenanigans and the things that they do to get money. People, they can't operate that way, which is why when the ACORN videos came out and Congress started paying attention and everybody started paying attention to ACORN, they disbanded, kind of. They just went underground. But they had to disband and go away because they can't survive that type of scrutiny. But I didn't realize that at the time. Still kind of naive. A lot of this stuff, like I said, hindsight is 20/20. So I waited until 2008. And now I know most of you may have heard of the ACORN embezzlement scandal. The founder's brother embezzled close to $1 million from the organization, and Wade Rathke was forced to step down. What most people don't know is that we knew about this for years. They've been floating around the office. It was closer to $5 million, and he didn't really embezzle it. It was used to fund ACORN International, but they couldn't figure out a way to get the money out of the accounts overseas, so they had Dale Rathke was running the accounts, do it in a way that, he had to fall on the sword. But what happened is that Wade Rathke stepped down as founder of ACORN in the United States, but he still runs ACORN International and SEIU. So he's in Indonesia, they're in the Philippines, they're in Nigeria, they're in Canada. Wade Rathke was messing around in Egypt when they were having their riots. He's been all over the world working, highly respected as a community organizer, because he was able to step down from ACORN in a way that kind of left him from being tainted, though his brother was tainted. And who did they put up there? Now, Wade Rathke, if you've ever seen this guy, he has got to be the whitest white guy in the world. I'm serious. But who did they put up there when they were going through their struggle and people were paying attention to the embezzlement scandal? They put Bertha Lewis. Bertha Lewis with her braids and her dashiki, and they made it seem like we were fighting against this little middle-aged woman who was trying to end poverty and work in her communities. And that was one of what I like to call some of the big lies of ACORN. One of the big lies of ACORN is that there are separate organizations when they're just one big ACORN organization that has all these little ones that feed it money. And the other big lie was that it's an organization run by black people trying to help black people. Me and Bertha Lewis were the only two blacks on national staff when I was there. Everyone else, the employees you would see on TV getting arrested, those were the disposable temporary employees that weren't really part of ACORN. What was really going on is that you had young white kids, liberal white kids with trust funds that were out there in these communities organizing black people, while they were telling you guys that it was too dangerous for you to go out there. And that's something I wanted to talk about today, to kind of just a second here off the topic, is that was the biggest thing, because they were taking money during the Bush years and during the Reagan years, and they were out there registering they were taking Republican money and registering Democrats. While they were telling you guys it's too dangerous out there, they were telling the black people, Republicans don't care about you, they hate you, they're trying to hold you down. We're the only ones working in these communities. We're the only ones that care. So they were sowing the seeds of division for upwards of 20 plus years till we have what we had in 2008, a perfect storm of situations of the economy, the racial tension, the ineffective president that was in office that led to people going, yes, we can, hope and change. And they didn't know what hope and change was. They just knew they wanted something different, and they knew that they were tired of not having a voice. And they were being promised a voice in this black man, in this black president. And I think it's the most ridiculous thing, because it wasn't really America speaking out as a whole. Between 2004 and 2007, ACORN registered 7 million new voters. 7 million new voters. And when I say new voters, these were unmatched voters, which means there was nothing coming from the right as far as anywhere near these numbers. What was Obama's margin of victory? Around 5 million? And when you think about that, 7 million new voters, some of them ineligible voters, some of them illegal voters, they created the margin of victory for Obama, and they made it seem like a landslide. And then what happened on our side is that you had people that, you basically had white guilt. White guilt got Obama elected because you had a lot of people that said, I'm not racist, and they voted for him against their better judgment. And you had other people that said, I'm not racist, I don't like either of the candidates, so I'm going to stay home. And that's exactly what happened. So it made it look like it was just this great victory for Obama, and it was just a perfect storm of events that had been orchestrated by these groups for years. It was that time. I don't think 2008 could ever be replicated again. But I digress. So after, in 2008, after the embezzlement scandal, I contacted the New York Times. And I was working with a reporter named Stephanie Strom. Stephanie Strom was writing on ACORN and all of its troubles. And I became a confidential informant. And I started giving her documents and emails and bank records and all types of information that she would need to show that not only was ACORN a criminal enterprise, but that some of its people could probably be prosecuted under civil or criminal RICO statutes. And if you look at her articles, each one was more watered down than the next. She was writing me emails telling me, oh, you're a gold mine, and I can't believe no one is going after this stuff. It would seem like she was going after her Pulitzer Prize. And Michelle Malkin wrote a lot about this and even exposed some of those emails in her book, Culture of Corruption, because it showed that they knew what was going on. They had all intents to publicize it, but along the way, the New York Times pulled back. Now, my daughter's been on this trip with me, and she's not here this morning, but I tell people the story, and she always freaks out when I tell it. But she was 2 at the time, and I always answered the phone when Stephanie called because I would, that's just how I am. But this one time, my daughter had got into my makeup, and I think this was how it was supposed to happen, honestly, because I was in there, and I was bathing her, and I heard the phone, and I was like, okay, it's going to have to go to voicemail. I'm wrestling around with her and stuff, and I dry her off, and I checked the voicemail, and it's Stephanie, and this voicemail was later played on the O'Reilly Factor, and it's her telling me that her editors had told her to stand down. So I'm like, stand down. She was coming to D.C. to get the Obama donor list. She had been able to prove through independent verification that there was meetings between ACORN, Project Vote, and the Obama campaign from another source, and I was willing to come forward and be named in the article. But she told me when I called her back that it was not the policy of the New York Times to print a game changer that close to the election for either side. Yes, I'm like, my brain's exploding. I'm like, are you kidding me? You guys just read a story about John McCain having an affair, and it was an anonymous source. So I was like, okay, the old gray lady, being a liberal. Now, this is all coming from the viewpoint of a liberal now, so think about this. So old gray lady wouldn't do it. Who do you go to next? I went to CNN, and Lou Dobbs and their Special Investigative Unit did a 3-tape interview, which I'm pretty sure if they had been able to just prove one lie in there, they would have aired it. But that interview never aired, they buried it. I went to ABC News, and the White House correspondent Martha Raddatz was able to prove that the list couldn't have come from anywhere but the campaign because the FEC didn't have it. So all of these organizations and outlets, no one would wanted to cover this story before the election. The only outlet that wanted to cover it was Fox. And that's why I tell you guys that it's amazing to be here today speaking, because at that time in 2008, I lived in Prince George's County, Maryland. If you spoke about Obama, you could get beat up. And I was thinking, okay, this racist Fox News, they finally found the one black girl that's going to say something negative about Obama, and they're going to put me on loop the weekend before the election. And I was like, no, that's not going to be me. I was terrified. I didn't want to do it. So I will always regret that, but it talks a little bit about programming, how people can control your actions without even being there, how they demonize people so much, and as Brandon talks about, how they dehumanize them to the point where you're not people anymore. You're evil, racist, whatever folks that are going to use or manipulate me or hold me back. And that's why it's so great to be here today, because that programming only lasts for so long. It's only so long you can, say that people are evil or racist before you realize they're projecting. And that's what they really do. They would say, ACORN would say, we'll work with conservatives. Just don't teach them how to, they call you Republicans. Just don't teach them how to organize and don't let them use our equipment. But if there was some issue that we could kind of work with you guys on, we would do it. But what really is the scariest thing for them is a united right, a united and organized right. Because I have been across the country. I've been since 2009. And a lot of times people didn't know who I was. I look different depending on how I do my hair. I call it incognito. You sit in the back. You're just another black person. You're just blending in. And no one's ever been racist or mean to me. I've gone from Tea Party groups to whatever 912 groups. I have never experienced not one drop of racism. And I come from the South, and I will tell you, coming from the South, we might have had racism in Alabama, but it was racism with a smile. Because everybody's friendly, everybody's polite. We don't get in your face and get rude to you. I experienced more racism in the liberal North than I ever did in the South. Because in the liberal North, they're so elitist that they deny your actual personhood. It's like you don't exist. And I had never experienced that before. Even like I said, in the South, it's all, hey, how you doing? You go about your business. In the North, they will walk right into you. They'll walk through you. They look through you like you're not there. And these are the same liberals that say they love us so much. They're the ones that gentrify our neighborhoods and push us out further into the suburbs. But they love us, but they won't live next to us. It's amazing how that works. So that's what I saw when I was living up north, and that's what I saw when I started working with the Tea Party. It's that the more I became conservative, and that didn't happen until 2009, and I'll tell you that really quickly. Barack Obama himself turned me into conservative because I went and I voted, yes. I went and I voted for him on election day. It was raining. I took my daughter and I went back and I wrote on my blog, and it was the first piece I wrote on my blog, and I hadn't written anything before, but I was tired of people telling my story and they kept getting it wrong, so I said I was going to tell it myself. So I wrote about it, going and how I felt like America was speaking for the first time, and I was so proud of how we were coming past race. And within 15 days after the election, even before he got inaugurated, he started picking his cabinet members. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, okay, when I left ACORN, I worked with American Rights at Work, which is a far-left organization funded by SEIU, and their main goal is to pass card check. So Hilda Solis, Hilda Solis was the treasurer of American Rights at Work when I was there, and while she was in Congress. So when I saw that she was being picked for labor secretary, I knew what that was for. That was for card check. I organized an event where Kathleen Sebelius, who was the governor of Kansas, she took the state of Kansas plane to D.C. to accept an award for Andy Stern, and they spent the night trying to figure out how they were going to pass universal health care. Then you've got Leon Panetta. Leon Panetta has obvious socialist and communist ties to the Communist Party of the United States. He also has been a longtime ACORN supporter. So I'm looking at all the people he's picking, and I'm like, how can you be a good guy and everybody around you is corrupt and crooked? And I was through it. I was so hurt. And I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm through. I cannot do this anymore. And I said, and no offense to anyone in this room, but I said, I cannot become a Republican. You guys have a real bad PR problem. I mean, seriously. I've never seen anything like it. So I decided I was going to become an ex-liberal, and that's what I was, and that's what I put on my bio when I started my blog and when I put on my Twitter, and I was like, I don't know if this is an actual thing, but I'm an ex-liberal. And that's what I became. And after that, and going around the country, I realized why. I was threatened. My house, they tried to break in my house. They sued me for $5 million when I probably didn't even have $5 to give them at the time. It was just weird, and they were trying to use those Alinsky tactics to isolate me and to shut me up. And I didn't realize why until later. It's because I was a threat. I was dangerous. Not only did I know the inside tactics of the left, but I was talking to you guys about it. I was exposing their secrets. It's just like black people get mad at Bill Cosby for getting up and saying things because he says it in front of white people. It's like, they already know, guys. I'm sorry, the secret's out. But they would get so mad at him for doing that because you were not supposed to say those things around other black people. And the stuff I talk to you guys about, you're not supposed to say outside of your liberal friends and your community. They don't need to know how things work. You guys are not supposed to know how to organize, or the fact that what terrifies them the most is if we get together as Americans. And that's what we are. We have more in common than we have differences. And I've learned that throughout my going around the country. I've met some of the nicest, sweetest people. They will open their homes for you. They will go out of their way to make sure that you're okay. And that's even if they don't know who you are. It's just, and I said this last night, and I don't think a lot of people realize it when I said it, but you guys are your own best asset. You just don't know it yet. You don't understand because you've been called racist, you've been beat up on, you've been dehumanized, people have made you feel unsure of your actions. But just being who you are, everyday Americans, you're your own best asset. People just need to see it and experience it. And I'll tell you this very quick story before I end, because I tend to go long sometimes. But I saw it myself in Houston, Texas in 2010. I went down there for a speaking engagement, sort of like this, and I met Catherine Engelbrecht of the King Street Patriots. By the time she picked me up from the airport and took me back to the office, I felt like I had known Catherine my entire life. She's the type of person, she didn't get into this to be a leader, she didn't get into this to be named, she was trying to do what was right, and along the way, God chose her to be a leader. And it's just natural. And so I was there, and I was listening to the story of the King Street Patriots and how they started True the Vote, and they had the nerve, the audacity to put poll watchers into the polls across Houston, Texas, including Sheila Jackson Lee's district. They were shot at. Their building had bullet holes in it when I got there. We had to have security around us. They were sued. They were vilified. They would say that there was 60s-style voter intimidation and racism coming out of these poll watchers. And the only thing they did was go into places where they hadn't seen conservatives in 30-plus years. And I will tell you, it was Sheila Jackson Lee and it was Quanell X of the New Black Panthers. They were the ones making all that noise. They have early voting in Houston. So those people were there for upwards of 2 weeks. And after the 2-week period in 3rd Ward in Houston, which is not your, the best neighborhood to be in, they were laughing and joking with those conservatives and having lunch, and they invited them to come back for the next election cycle, because it's proved when you let Americans be Americans and you take away all the barriers, we have so much more in common. And they realized that, and they became friends. The people that were trying to keep that from happening were the agitators, like Sheila Jackson Lee, but they couldn't control the interactions of the people because there were so many different polls and people working, poll workers. So if you've got to 100, or I think they put 800 poll workers across Harris County, Texas. And out of that, there were no incident reports of racism or intimidation or anything. What would happen is that we built relationships that are now turning into permanent friendships in these communities. So if it can happen in the 3rd Ward of Houston, in the middle of Sheila Jackson Lee's rough and tumble district, with Quanell X and the New Black Panthers trying to prevent it from happening, it can happen anywhere in America, and they don't want it to. So that's what you guys need to realize. You are your own best asset. We just have to get out there and get active in these communities. For so long, we've let groups like ACORN go into these communities and vilify us and talk about us. If they under the pretense of caring for the people. They don't care for the people. We care for America. We've got to take it back block by block. We didn't lose it that way, but that's how we're going to have to take it back. So I hope you guys will realize that. It's not about liking a post on Facebook. It's not about talking to your friends and sending an email. We have to get out there. Michelle Obama said that her husband will not let us go back to our normal everyday lives, and she was right. We'll never go back to where we were before. We can't afford to. Thank you. I just want to end with this. Benjamin Franklin said he gave us a republic if we can keep it. This is our chance to prove him right. Thank you.